folks who maybe are feeling estranged in our time behind a screen so much, people who are coming out and engaging with each other from all over, but really what they begin lingering is when we had cider on tap.
Hello, my name is Ria Windcaller, and I am the producer and cider MC of this weekly podcast, where we speak with makers, cider enthusiasts, and folks within the cider trade from around the world.
Hooray!
Bringing us into this year episode number 377 of Cider Chat, you heard from Christopher Piana of Fable Farm Fermentory. Both Chris and his brother Johnny, who is a head cider maker, will be our featured guest on this here episode, so stay tuned for that. Meanwhile, we have a wee bit of news from out and about in Ciderville, starting with a word about one of our sponsors. Sweet, crisp, fresh, or balanced, whatever the cider you want to make, you'll find the right yeast for your favorite cider in the Saf Cider range by Fermentis. This week, let's discover Saf Cider TF6. TF6 stands for Tutti Frutti. Use this yeast to maximize the fruitiness of your cider. It ensures a very good assimilation of fructose and is excellent for high-gravity ciders. It brings a very high aromatic intensity and complexity towards fresh, fruity notes such as apple, banana pear, red, citrus, and exotic fruits, combined with interesting, elaborate fruit notes such as applesauce. You'll also find a sweet and round mouthfeel strengthening candy-like sensation. Saf Cider TF6 is dedicated to intensely fruity but rather sweet and round ciders. Want to explore diversity of cider profiles? Discover it through the selection of yeast strains visiting the website fermentis.com. Now I have to admit, I do like sweet ciders. I am a big fan, absolutely, of dry cider. But a well-balanced sweet cider, there's a time for it. There is a perfect time for it. And, I do have a little bit of a sweet tooth, I will confess. So there is a yeast for every palate and also a yeast for every cider. Check it all out at fermentis.com. It's part 4 of Let's Go to Idaho. This is in collaboration with the Northwest Cider Association, who is sponsoring these segments. You can find out all about the Pacific Northwest and Idaho cideries by going to nwcider.com. On the last episode of Cider Chat, we met Nikki Conley, who is the owner of Apple Orchard in North Idaho. And I say specifically North Idaho because there are regional pronunciations in every part of the world, and also that is true for Idaho. And because I know Ciderville really likes to travel like a local wherever you are in the world, I think you'll find this little segment really entertaining to up your game for when you visit Idaho and all the great cider makers there. Take it away, Nikki.
Idaho. Like, the H is almost not there, like Idaho.
Idaho.
Mm-hmm.
Idaho.
But also, you don't ever call it northern Idaho. That'll give you away, too. It's North Idaho. We have a Moscow. Everybody says Moscow. Honestly, when you go to Idaho, the native will listen to you. And if you say Moscow, they're like, you're not from here. Or they have a St. Mary's, but it looks like Marie. Like, my middle name is Marie. M-A-R-I-E. It's St. Marie's. But if you say St. Marie's, they're like, you're not from here, because they say St. Mary's. And it's totally not spelled that way.
So if you want to act like a local, you got to not say Moscow. You have to say
Moscow. And St. Mary's instead of St. Marie's. Coeur d'Alene is, some of the outsiders say Coeur d'Alene or Aline. Like, and it's a French Coeur d'Alene.
Coeur d'Alene.
Yeah.
Now we all have some insider tips for visiting Idaho. On the next episode of Cider Chat, we're going to be leaving North Idaho and heading south. But in the meanwhile, you could check out all about the state and the Pacific Northwest in general and the ciders that they lend by going to nwcider.com.
Walking through the orchards,
Up next is our featured conversation with Jon and Christopher Piana of Fable Farm Fermentory in Barnard, Vermont. And if you don't know where Barnard is located, you might have an idea or have heard of the town of Woodstock, which is right alongside the Interstate 91 corridor, which goes from the top of Vermont all the way down south through Massachusetts and Connecticut, and then hits 95 down at the bottom of Connecticut and New Haven. So I-91, as they call it, goes straight up that side of the state, and that's really like kind of the eastern side of the state. It's going like parallel to New Hampshire. And along the way, you will hit different towns, and one is Woodstock, and then to the northwest is the town of Barnard. Fable Farm is located on a dirt road ride where many different sites in Vermont are located. It's a really beautiful drive, and when you arrive, you come up to a magnificent barn, and it's painted yellow, and the upper half has a tasting room there. That's where they have tanks, and they also have vinegar, and they have outdoor events. On Thursdays, which was when I was visiting during the summer months, they have what is called Feast and Field, and that's where you could enjoy live music and also have food and tastings. So they'll be talking a little bit more about that, but I just want to give you a sense of this place here because it's a really nice visit. They've been upping their game for, well, going on 16 years now. And I have taken my New England cider tours to Fable Farm for different lunches and dinners. It's always a big hit with everyone on the tour. But this was a very special gathering because all the time that I've been visiting them, I've never recorded an interview with Jon or Chris. So we had a good sit down, and it was a really hot day in, well, the tail end of June. And so we met in the cave. See, on the one side, under the belly of the barn, is a cave, and it's kind of a Quonset hut shape, and that's like a half of a circle shape. It's all underground, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that. And you can see photos of the cave where they store all the barrels and bottles by going to ciderchat.com. I really recommend taking a look at it because it'll give you a sense, and that's a little bit why there's a certain echo sound during this recording. It's not really echo, but it just gives you a hollow sound because we were down in the cave, which is exactly where you want to be when tasting cider. You'll hear them mentioning Todd Parlow during this conversation, and Todd Parlow was just on the last episode of Cider Chat, number 376, and he manages and runs Walden Heights Nursery and Orchard, and that's one of the locations that they get their apples. So that's, if you want to find out more about Todd and what he's doing there, just go to the last episode of Cider Chat before this one. They also mentioned Flag Hill, and that was Sebastian of Flag Hill Cidery. And Flag Hill has also been on the New England Cider Tour, and that is one of the oldest cideries in the U.S. It's totally off-the-grid, solar-powered, organic, and just a delightful cider that they have there. So they mentioned that. They also have oak barrels, and they talk about VA. We're talking about VA and tasting cider. And VA stands for volatile acidity. And oftentimes it's like if you taste a cider and you're like, oh, wow, that's really like high acid, almost vinegary. That's what people are referring to. We started in the cave. Chris was there, and then he left shortly through, and I was just hanging out with Johnny, and near the end, we're actually tasting some of the ciders. Then he left, and I was left alone in the cave while they were running the event upstairs, which is, for this podcaster, I mean, no better place in the world to be than being surrounded by barrels of cider and a tasting glass in hand. We're going to begin by hearing from Jon Piana telling us about the backstory of Fable Farm. So this is an excellent time to grab a glass and join this chat with Jon Piana and Christopher Piana of Fable Farm Fermentory in Barnard, Vermont.
Fable Farm is fruit farm, fruit and herbs mostly, that it was established specifically to
put to use the fruit in the fermentory, in the factory, so to speak. So our intention was to sort of like marry the farm and factory through Fable Farm Fermentory. We do that by making lots of cider and grape wine and mead, and we're not bashful to blend categories, so we blend cider with grape wine and mead with cider and all of the above, and we make meads from tree saps. But our bread and butter and our core is cider. It's kind of what opened the doorway for us in terms of fermentation and winemaking. And we're also sort of really keen on bringing people together, so we use what we ferment and to put out on the table and sort of as like a magnetic offering to bring people together and celebrate life. So I'd say our mission in essence is to make place-based wines and vinegars, cider being the bulk of it, and that really celebrates place and to bring people together to celebrate life. I went to college, and in college discovered that I came into a relationship with agriculture via being a lover of nature, finding my peace in the wild. It was the plants that really called me, and so I started studying ethnobotany and how humans use plants. And I was going to transfer and become an ethnobotanist, and I did a program in Panama. And in that program, I realized that ethnobotany was amazing, but it was a little bit too romantic for my lifestyle. I basically discovered agriculture and how that would root me to place instead of bringing me all over the world and being more of a international traveler. I've sort of felt the call to just root down and start growing things and understanding my place in the world through the growing of things, and that led to meeting up with Christopher and starting Fable Farm as a vegetable farm. In college, I created a major studying agroecology, where I brought all types of disciplines together to study the food system. And one of the main sort of tenets I came out of that study is how important it is to revitalize agrarian living and countryside and the rural living, to sort of make farming sexy again, so to speak. And so I found bringing art into agriculture and using a community supported agriculture model to generate creative economy was where we came from with Fable Farm initially as a vegetable farm. So our CSA pickup was born. For the last 15 years, every Thursday from May through September, we've gathered people, and it's blossomed into Feast and Field gathering. Live music, farm fresh food, and just a fresh bar that we put out there with our products. As we were vegetable farming, we realized fermentation was a really potent way to bring value to our efforts. Where vegetable farming, there's a lot of set it up, break it down. There's a lot of energy extolled each year, and so we started to gear ourselves towards how can we make products that have a long shelf life. And I read this book called Sacred and Healing Beers by Stephen Harold Buhner, which was sort of a big gateway for me into the world of fermentation and how cultures around the world historically would approach it. Alongside that book, we basically just took a nod from our landscape and just seeing apples just drop every which way and no one using them. And we had thought about different types of making a farmhouse beer or doing this or that, but it was the apples that really called us in just by their sheer abundance and their offering. And so we just started making cider. Bought a barrel from Tennessee whiskey folks down there, and the first time we ever made cider, we filled a barrel, and put a tap on just so we could drink through the winter. And the next winter is 2 barrels, and then the next winter is probably 20 barrels.
How many barrels are there now?
I bet there's 100, 120, so
Okay.
With a bunch of tanks and all sorts of bins, all sorts of vessels that we're working with.
That's sizable. I've noticed that the tasting room is now filled with barrels, where in the past it was tables, but
yeah,
a lot of flux happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we're looking back at like 15 years or so.
15 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
I want to just add a little bit how the Apple kept calling us in because our first year, we tilled like 2 acres up behind one of the oldest organic beef farmers in the state, and we grew 2 acres of vegetables for the CSA and market gardens, farmers markets. But then he didn't want the pickup to happen in his backyard anymore. So we went to the center of our town where there was no stoplights and one stop sign, and rented this old farmhouse, plowed up the back of that yard, and created a U-pick garden. And so folks would come and pick their cherry tomatoes and their bouquet of flowers and basil, etc. But right in, like, featured in the backyard was probably one of the biggest, oldest apple trees I've ever seen in my life. And we would always reference it, the Mama Apple. And it had this really incredibly far-reaching sine wave branching structure that created this amazing portrait for bands to play under. So it became our featured stage.
Oh my goodness.
And literally I came from, my background was in community development and more studying cosmologies and how resource base would inform belief systems and ways of human relation. Again, the farming was a tool of bringing people together left and right. It was, healing folks who maybe are feeling estranged in our time behind a screen so much. People were coming out engaging with each other from all over. But really what they began lingering is when we had cider on tap. When the cider was put on tap, and this was all for donation, and this was totally raw and very, the spark of creativity was fresh. People started hanging around, and the next thing you know, we had musicians that said, "Oh, can we play?" And we're like, "Sweet." And then the musicians started playing, and then we said, "Let's build a earth oven." So we built the Cobb earth oven and started slinging pizzas for donations. And the next thing you know, there are like hundreds of people coming to this backyard, and like micro enterprises were sprouting all throughout community. Nonprofit arts were expressing in our community. Like, it became this thriving sort of revival of young people, multi-generational connections happening. And so to me, the thread along this was always the cider. And you people would come in and they would even remark, like, "I'm so introverted, but I drink your cider and I can't stop talking." And it's just like, to me, that's the essence of the apple in a way. It's so convivial and expressive and gentle, right? It's just like a gentle trickster in certain ways. And so
as people would come, they'd try the cider and be like, "Oh, I have an apple tree." Like, "Oh, I don't like riding my lawnmower over them. Why don't you come get my apples?" And so that just led to us building connections and expanding our forage. So what we would do is we would take burlap bags, and we still do this today. The main volume of what's in these barrels is through taking burlap bags from Green Mountain coffee roasters and throwing them in the back of our dump truck and just going out and finding trees, building off the relationships of our neighbors, finding wild trees and climbing the trees, shaking them and picking them up, putting them in burlap bags. We're making cider from an otherwise unused resource throughout the community, and then we'd bring it back, and then the community would come and drink multi-blend that we would put out that was from apples from all their trees. It was such a sort of two-way street that really speaks to a nice symbiosis of apples and community. And not to mention that cider is, in our opinion, the best cider is the blend, and it's just taking apples from this tree,
not
and that
single
tree.
Varietal is what you're saying.
Yeah,
a blend of these foraged fruits.
Exactly, foraged fruits. So that co-evolution of humanity and apple trees that really show themselves nicely through the forage and through the gathering.
Another reason why we sort of landed with the apple too is because of like Johnny was mentioning, 10-mile radius, being able to forage 3,000 to 4,000 gallons on a pretty good year with just copious amounts of fruit all over the place. And these are all unmanaged, unsprayed, just trees thriving where they are, growing like weeds in our zone. One of the things that we care about is not participating in the chemical agriculture. This is another way that we can do that, is raising fruit without participating in that necessarily, because it's all going to be cider fruit. If we wanted to buy organic apples, we can't really in the state, and we get why. because it's a difficult growing space for a large number of trees, a single kind of species thing in one area.
Other than Walden Heights.
But we get our tree other than Walden Heights in Todd Carlo, which is we feel incredibly fortunate and blessed for. And then also the other folks at Nursery too. I went and visited with Sabra.
Yeah.
Okay. Of Flag Hill.
Yeah.
And he showed me his orchard and how he didn't
organic off the grid.
Totally organic off the grid and
up on top of a mountain.
Exactly. And he was making great cider. And so it was just we can send this product. We don't need preservatives, and we can send it across the country. We're able to access more value. It grows like weeds in our zone, and we don't need to participate in the chemical sort of production of it, and that was like win-win across the board.
Yeah, and we started to find that the cider that we were making had a really strong stability without the use of sulfur or any laboratory-derived products. We found that it was through the aging and keeping it raw that brought the stability and the diversity of the population numbers of, we don't even know the names of the microbes, we just know that there's lots of them in there and yeast and bacteria. And so our process that we started from the beginning in making cider hasn't changed. Like we just press it's changed a lot. It definitely has changed a lot, but the sort of foundation hasn't changed, which is, pressing the cider and putting them into barrels of different types of barrels. Some are charcoal barrels, which I actually think add to a purification process because of the charcoal. But
charcoal barrels,
like the bourbon barrels.
Okay, all right, yeah. Like they're kind of toasted.
Yeah. They're even gone beyond toasted into like more of like a charred situation, whereas we have the wine barrels that are just lightly toasted, but letting the bacteria take over after the yeast has fermented out all the sugars, and you see a bacterial succession happen that just softens the cider, the lactic acid bacteria softening the malic acid. And when we first started making cider, we were really drawn to the romanticism of like what it tastes like coming out of the barrel. When you go down into your cellar, open the tap and just fill a pitcher and go back up and enjoy it with your friends. Like that's kind of like where we were coming from, and that's our still point in Fluxion, where it goes through that culturing of barrels. And I found that through that process, you can open up a bottle that, especially still point, that hasn't been carbonated in bottle, and leave it on the counter and come back to it for days on end because it's just nice and stable.
Kind of a living food though too, right? So it's just still getting a certain complexity as it goes along.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about your cider making then. In the barrel, so ambient yeast, which is now all over, your buildings here, even more so than it was before because you're making so much. And sulfites or no sulfites?
We don't use them.
Okay, no sulfites.
Yeah, it's just not something that we've found that we've had to use. Kind of the concept of like not changing something that's already working. And we have a real house flavor, a house yeast and flavor that comes from the different bacteria here that kind of shows up even through our different types of wines, grape, apple, mead and stuff, and just don't really want to mess with that too much.
Totally, yeah. Everybody wants their own signature cider for their market. What about the leaves? Are you doing any kind of stirring of the leaves, like batonnage at all? Does that happen here?
We've done a little bit of that, but because we're juggling so much, we basically have taken the approach of the path of least resistance. Just let the cider be, so to speak. Where I would be really interested to do batonnage, I just haven't really developed a program for that quite yet, where it's consistent enough to say, okay, we've done batonnage, but I am very intrigued to do that side by side with a barrel that isn't, and just kind of explore the difference. Where we have experimented with is extended maceration, using the macro bins that people will do grape macerations in, and would grind right into that. And at first we started adding back a little juice to make it easier to incorporate and make sure that it didn't dry out and it's keeping it fresh. But then we realized that just was too much effort, and you kind of were backtracking a little bit. So we just just a couple days where it's like a really hard punch down, but eventually there's enough liquid is released that there's enough juice to sort of keep the maceration fresh. And what we found with that process, the maceration makes the cider taste smoother, and it's more ready to drink quicker than if we were to just take the apples, grind them, press them, put them in a barrel. It becomes like a totally different thing. It almost to the point where it's like too soft. It's like
like a flabbiness, would you say?
Not necessarily flabbiness. I would. Well, maybe if I'm not understanding flabby, but it's more just like super smooth and soft. You would think that the longer it sat on its skins, the more bitter it would be, but it's the opposite. It's like at a certain point, the substances are drawn out of solution or something. Something happens where in extended maceration, the longer it sits, the softer the flavors and the less like off flavors you end up getting. Because that's one thing that we did get in the beginning, especially as we would taste the barrels, we'd have to go through some sort times where they weren't smelling that good or tasting that good, which we don't really see as much anymore, as I think the cultures are built up. We reuse the barrels because that's one of the things we don't retire our barrels unless we will retire our barrels once they get a little bit too much volatile acidity, and they'll just become vinegar barrels, and we only rinse our barrels with water.
Okay, so
I would say that we only really macerate foraged sort of ancestry tree, wild tree fruit. We don't have any cultivated, like when we get Walden Heights, it comes in juice form. So we don't have any experience macerating or a cultivated fruit. Although I take that back, we probably got we have but more dessert cultivated. I mean, we forage, but they're not being managed anymore. Some of these orchards and
the length of time is really the main area of experimentation, where anywhere from overnight to a month we've done.
You mentioned the VA, and I'm wondering how much VA you find on your ciders and the techniques that you're doing.
Yeah, we're sort of celebrating the spectrum of wine and vinegar. We're not afraid of Acetobacter or other bacteria, Brettanomyces, or all these other bacteria that other wineries and cideries might be afraid of. Our approach is not to try to exclude them, but just to recognize that they'll always will be there, and it's just a game of population numbers and conditions. So we try to ferment slow and steady, as cold as possible. I'll top up the barrels once a year.
That's pretty remarkable when you think about it, and that probably has a lot to do with the fact that we're in a cave right now.
Yeah.
And so we're underground. There's always constant temperature. It's 55 degrees year-round in here.
I mean, I wish that was the case.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Say more.
We're in a building that isn't quite a warehouse. So we're in nooks and crannies all over this building. Some places we're in the loft in a barn. Some places we're in a quasi-air. It's an air-conditioned room with no insulation. Then we have this cave, which takes a long time to change temperature, but it actually from winter to summer changes quite a lot. Because it's on the south side and it's below a patio that heats up, and I don't really know why, but there's some it can get up to 70 in here.
Ooh, oh, wow.
Yeah, and it can get down as cold as 37.
Ooh.
So I mean, we've actually are making. But the good thing about the cave is it doesn't do that overnight. It takes days and days and days to change.
Yeah.
So I think that helps, but we haven't found that it's much of an issue necessarily. Although we would 100% perform, we would prefer the 55-degree constant. Yeah. And there was when we first started fermenting at the farmhouse. We were that that basement actually was more stable, temperature-wise, and then we were also in a garage, so we were fermenting at temperatures down as low as 32. It would just and then we'd be able to in the spring it would wake up again, and we'd be able to bottle it as a pétillant naturel, where you capture the primary fermentation and get bubbles. So that was fun.
Is that happening anymore? Are you doing pétillant at all?
We are with Walden Height fruit.
Okay.
Our emanation is all Walden. from Todd Parlow's orchard, and we bottle that before it finishes fermentation, and that's only ever in stainless steel.
Okay.
We chose Walden fruit for that because it's always the most flavorful juice and sort of interesting. And thought we'd celebrate it without getting the influence of the oak or the neutral oak and the ecosystems in the barrel and the aging process. Getting back to the VA component, we top off the barrels like in maybe once in the fall when there's juice flowing in upstairs, and we don't. A lot of times I'll just do it when I don't have anywhere to go with the juice, and I'm like, all right, let's top off all the barrels. And other than that, we let the evaporation happen. There is, especially on the cider, a nice like white floor that forms surface yeast, and this is one of the things that when I first started making cider, I was writing the Cider Digest, or not the Cider Digest, Cider Workshop about, and I really appreciate the people there and the expertise that they have, but they were all sort of gearing me away from the surface yeast reality, and because I was reading the Sacred Healing Beers and like had a more of experimental sort of like nature to my approach, like I didn't have as much fear because of that, reading some other texts, and I just sort of decided to roll with it because it was tasting good. Well, come to find out, it seems like it sort of forms to protect the wine from too much oxygen as it evaporates
in the barrel. Yeah.
And if like it also forms a vacuum if your bungs are acting properly. So that helps too. But we're kind of making like an oxidated based cider here. I think you could say like our Fluxion and Still Point is definitely like heavily oxidized, but not to the point where then it goes to vinegar. Because we are maintaining stable temperatures to some degree, combination of the surface yeast, the floor, the temperature, the balanced ecology. It doesn't matter that we're making vinegar right there. That room is vinegar room, this is the barrel room, and that was the other thing the old timers said you shouldn't do, which I was like, shoot, are we just too radical here? But so far we've successfully been making vinegar and cider in the same space. Not the same space, but same building complex, different room. And I just think it comes down to the fact that, there is VA in our ciders, but it's balanced.
What about the timeline from beginning to start? Because I think that's also what's really unique here is you aren't doing what I consider like a modern style. You're giving the cider time in the barrel aging. So what is that time period?
It varies based on the different characters that we make. Emanation, made from Walden Heights Nursery and Orchard, is basically, comes in through September through October, sometimes into November, and gets bottled like in January, and then it spends like a good anywhere from 3 months to a year to 2 in the bottle, because we both age in bottles and in vessels, which bottle aging is quite important in our world. So then Fluxion and Still Point. Fluxion and Still Point are the same blend, and it's a Solera style where like we'll blend. Well, basically it's a blend of a 1 year aged cider blended with 2 year aged cider, and it's usually 2/3 of the blend is the 2 year aged cider and 1/3 is the 1 year aged cider. And so every winter, and usually in February or March, we'll blend Fluxion Still Point and then re-barrel down 2 barrels, which is the Fluxion Solera here, this barrel and that barrel. And then the next winter, that'll be the seed for the next blend. So we've been doing that since 2015, and so that you kind of get a little essence of 2015, 16, 17, 19, and all the blends thereafter. And so that's sort of that time period. Generally, I'd say like a lot of the other blends and Ciders and grape apple blends and things, I generally find that like things will be living here for about 1 year to 1 to 2 years before getting in bottle, but then another because it takes time to sell things, and another 1 to 2 years in bottle. But our whole approach is just to sort of make cider the way you put up your firewood. You just get ahead of it, and as you're adding to it, you're not adding to you're not burning the firewood that you're putting up that year.
No.
You know, so that's kind of our approach. And so therefore when September comes around, we get a little crazy, and we have these big old tanks that we got. They're horizontal stainless steel tanks that we got from Von Trapp. They're old lagering tanks. Mm-hmm. They're up in the loft, and we use them as just a way to put up as much cider as we can when the apples are there.
Yeah.
And that's usually from for us. We don't really start in August, even though we could. We're nice to ourselves and start in September, and then go until we can't dig through the snow as much anymore. You know, we'll even harvest frozen apples that have been frozen and defrosted, and it's like beautiful to make cider with those apples. So through November, and then we kind of keep them like this micro seasonal blends. You know, and that tank's like, okay, that's like September, and that tank is like, you know, October. Mm-hmm. They often blend together, but throughout that harvest, we'll take some cider and like macerate it with grape skins, but for the most part, the experimentation for us has been in the slower time of the year, in the winter, where we have more time. When fall's happening and harvest happening, there's not a lot of time and energy to conceive of different co-fermentations and things. So we've historically done a lot of steeps, where the cider's already fermented, and then we'll like steep herbs or other fruits in the cider and use it as a medium. Getting back to the maceration, we found maceration to be like a really good medium for blending other stuff into. It just like receives other stuff, acts like a great backdrop that softens like higher acids in grapes or stronger flavors. You know, maybe you have a barrel that went a little too volatile acidity, so you can blend that with a barrel that isn't as much, and then you bring that volatile acidity into balance, things like that.
Talk a little bit about your co-ferment, because you make wine here too. Mm-hmm. Where are you sourcing your grapes from? Because I know that you have some, you know, on the property here.
Yeah, we have like a 2-acre vineyard that's going to be our first real sizable harvest this year. Planted in 2019. Our first grape vintage was 2016, and we basically have just sourced through a handful of Vermont vineyards. Lincoln Peak, Penny Hill Vineyard. There's a vineyard in Roxbury that we're working with, Frontenac, Fisher Brothers with some Marquette, and all Ellison Estate, a bunch of different wineries. We've used way back in the day some of Garagista skins and different people's skins that they sort of discard, and we use it for like a flavoring and a color. But we do less of that now as we grow our own grapes and we have access, and we're actually making grape wine. That we're doing more actual like co-fermentations with grape and apples as opposed to steeping the skins.
So when you say co-fermentation, you're blending at the juice of the two?
Yeah, it's like a combination of like using some of the residual juice that after pressing that we weren't able to press out, and letting that co-ferment with cider, to blending. We haven't done as much, although we will as we get more volume of grape wine, to blend the actual juice like from the juice stage instead of the wine stage. We do more blending. Like the grape wine makes itself, the apple wine makes itself, and we blend it after the fact. Just again, it comes down to just like when we have more time and repose to just like do those blending trials in the cellar in the winter. You know, that was one of the reasons why we actually got our vine and slices, because we started out a loophole, tax exempt cider, where we were just making still cider, and it was a loophole back in the day. During Prohibition, where farmers could still sell their cider at the farm stands as long as it was still, it had no preservatives, and it was below 7%. So that was sort of our like flagship style, and we went for that. And then we're like, all right, it's time to get some bubbles and time to make some mead and you know, some higher alcohol and whatnot. So we went for it.
I want to go a little bit more into that co-ferment, because we're seeing this. I mean, this is what's coming on like a lot for cider, and this co-ferment on the skins. I just talked to a French cider maker, Antoine Marot, at the Domaine Marot, and he is using dried grape pumice, which then under the French script allows him to call it cider. But in the U.S., you could do co-ferments, and it doesn't have to go to that kind of like French criteria.
Right.
Why are you doing it with the juice versus the skins? What do you like about that?
To be fair, the vast majority of what we have made is with the skins.
Okay.
Yeah, like Vinus, Venus, and Leo are two probably most well known grape apple ciders. Are skin based, and that we started that because that was just like the apples, like that was an available resource to us for free. And just allowed us to start experimenting, and felt like it was a great use. Instead of like making grappa or something, you made the cider.
Sure.
We're still doing that. We're also doing like a Jalu is like 50% cider base blended with 50% grape. Usually the cider is the macerated cider that's super smooth and like really good backdrop for like the stronger flavors of the grape. So it creates this I just feel like the grape and the apple really dance well, especially hybrid grapes that might have a little bit more acidity. It's like a really nice marriage. We sort of do everything, as far as like we don't have one approach to say, okay, that's it. Like it's just we're constantly experimenting. And if I were to like sum it up, like the art of blending is kind of what we're doing here, because we put up our mead, we put up our grape wine, our cider. We have our characters that are developed through the process. We pay homage to and keep bottling each year of, and then from there we can just like play with these random barrels, for this or that. That's whatever our muse is.
Well, I want to talk to you about that because I do know that you do make sure that you're holding back vintages. Is that correct?
Yeah, you mean like...
from 2015.
Yeah, you mean in the bottle?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we do, especially for our wine club, and we have a little archive...
down at the end of the cave.
Yeah.
John's looking down there right now, and you can see bottles stacked on the side. But also just for the experience of being able to see how your product develops over time.
Yeah.
It's educational.
Exactly.
On both ends.
Yeah, it's the library.
Yeah.
And, we have found that they keep really well, and they get better with age. But one thing I have noticed, which I didn't know beyond a few years ago, is that the still cider seems to reach a point of parabola where it kind of like it's like, all right, it actually was better last year, and then when it just becomes more and more like water, honestly.
Yeah.
And then the bubbles, like if you have little bubbles in there, then I have yet to seen a cider, not taste better, the older it is.
Yeah.
With the bubbles.
It's been a while since I tasted your cider, so
I'll have to pop one open.
Yeah, we'll have to pop one open.
Do you have a preference of which one? There's Emanation, Fluxion, Still Point. This is a Walden that's got a little age to it, and then this is like a Cisandra. So this is a Cider with Cisandra berries.
Oh,
in it.
Okay, cool. I'd love to try the Walden. I think let's start with that.
Okay. So the Walden is from Walden Heights Nursery and Orchard. There's like maybe a barrel or two a year that we set aside of Emanation for like another year of aging. And in this bottle we put just a tiny bit of maple syrup in at bottling just to give it a little spritz. And I pulled them out of the walk-in. I find though that the stills, the less bubbly ciders, like I personally like them more at room temperature.
Yeah, they change a lot.
And we'll see how this tastes like, because I may just go walk down over there and open one at the cellar temp if it's too cold. Yeah. Cheers.
Cheers.
The spritz isn't quite there when it's this cold. You don't really feel it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
It's still really like a really full flavored cider here. Let's just describe this cider just so folks listening right now can have a little bit of FOMO. The color itself, I'd say like a light golden to it. Nice clarity. I'm not getting any VA at all. So I just want to really make that stance because we talked a lot about that and I'm not getting any VA. Really bright, tannin. You're getting that nice tannin profile. And I just came directly from Walden Heights Nursery and Orchards up in Walden, Vermont. And so I was just walking amongst these trees. So I kind of have it, in my nostrils already, which is a really nice experience. the blend is really delightful.
The apple comes through, and there's this subtle barrel. Unlike the Emanation, which is just stainless steel and bottled younger, the Walden gets like another year in it, but it's in the barrel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The Walden, this particular vintage, showed a really nice sort of like symbiosis of the subtle oak, because we use neutral oak, but the subtle oak with the apple. Like I feel like they actually do well together.
Yeah, this is not for anybody. And some people are really like move away from the oak, but you're not getting anything here that is pronounced on the oak.
Yeah.
It's just a very softness to it.
It's more of the ecosystem in the barrel really, that you're tasting.
Yeah, totally. And what's the ABV on that?
This one, let's see, 7%.
Let's talk a little bit about folks visiting.
Yeah.
Because you have had like tastings before. You have the Feast and Field event that's happening throughout the summer. Every Thursday.
Yep, every Thursday from 5:30 on.
Music and food and cider.
And food and fires and we also, this is the first year at Feast and Field that we've opened our tasting room, so you can come and there's the main bar where we offer local beers and our ciders and grapes, wines, and meads, and we also offer some like other wines. We try to meet everyone where they're at because it's a community event. And then this year we opened up the barn to allow like people to have the Fable experience during the Feast and Field. They can buy bottles to go. They can get flights, get some pizza.
Perfect.
And that's
totally family-friendly experience.
Totally.
Right?
And that's what we do on Saturdays. Is our only other tasting room opening, 1 to 6 every Saturday. It's similar as the tasting room on Thursdays, where there's flights, glass pours, bottle pours, and pizza, cheese plates, and of course cider and cheese go so well.
Oh my God! Yeah, everybody's like licking their chops now.
Yeah.
So coming here to the Thursday nights is one way to get the product, taste the product. What about like the rest of the year?
Yeah, so there's a few ways. We offer a quarterly wine club, which we do both a 3-bottle and 6-bottle apple, and a 3-bottle, 6-bottle assorted. And that's fun because it's like people can get little, insights into the older bottles, and then, it's kind of a mixed bag all over the place, and you can go along the journey with us. And then we have an online shop. We work with Vino shippers, so we can ship to, I believe it's like 40 states or so.
Except like Utah.
Yep.
Sadly.
Yep. Last year, for the first time, we've been self-distributing in Vermont, but we started working with Vermont wine merchants, so now we can be found like all throughout the state, like all the nooks and crannies.
So wine shops, and like from Brattleboro in the south all the way up to Burlington.
Exactly.
You're going to be able to find it in Montpelier.
Some restaurants, and then we sell out of state. We work with distributors in Texas, California, Chicago, Washington, Oregon, and Rhode Island, a little bit in Maine.
Oh, that's
New
news
York
to me.
City.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Congratulations for that.
Yeah, and we still have yet to make it into Massachusetts and New Hampshire. We'd really love to.
I know. Why not?
Yeah.
Well, we got to just come up here and visit you.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm here now. But let's try one more cider. I'm going to throw out another question here. So,
you choose.
Okay.
There's the Emanation that's coming from Walden as well, and then there's the Fluxion that we've talked about.
Yeah. Well, let's try the Emanation.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, that nice, really light color. Just a little bit lighter than the Walden. I have found over tasting cider and doing this for so many years now, I don't want to sip immediately because it needs to like aerate a little bit out of the glass. If I do that, sometimes I'll sneeze or kind of, it's opening. The apple's like, okay, I'm out of the bottle now. Give me a little bit of space, people.
Absolutely. When we first started making cider too, we always tell people, don't judge it until the third sip.
Yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah, your palate has to set.
Yeah. This one's very crisp.
Yep. So because we just had the last the bottle of Walden, called Walden, and then we're changing here. When I take this next sip, I'm just washing my mouth a bit, just trying to like get my body to reset here. So we'll do that again. Kind of chewing it. And what I'm getting immediately is just like this full mouth flavor. Again, no VA.
Yeah, this one no VA.
No VA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just really, this is a nicely balanced cider.
It is, yeah. This is kind of our gateway cider as far as if someone is sort of somewhat new to cider, or their palate isn't necessarily wanting to explore all different types of flavors. We find it to be the middle of the road, kind of approachable cider. Not for everyone, of course, but
if that's middle of the road, then I don't know what like the high road is. I mean, that's a rock solid cider, man. Yeah. Really, sure. It has that little spritz, a little bit.
Yeah, like very like cutting dryness, and which go so well with cheese and spicy foods.
Yeah, and that astringency.
Astringency.
I'm getting it on my throughout my entire mouth. A little bit, not too much on my teeth, but it is balanced. My body kind of relaxes into it. That's exactly what you want out of a cider. So I could see how you could kind of see it like a gateway in a way.
Yeah,
but it's good.
It's a really good cider.
Yeah.
By gateway in middle of the road, I don't mean like the quality as much as just the approachability.
Yeah. Tangy on the tongue. And what's nice from a maker's point of view, this is a cider that makes you say, "Hey, I'm still thirsty," because it's making the mouth water a bit. So you want to say, I need a little bit more sip.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the way that cider keeps on, like a jokester, pull it in, keep on sipping, Rios, keep on sipping.
It does do that.
And here I am, so many years later, still sipping. But this one in particular.
Yeah.
Because of that astringency.
Yeah.
And it does make it a little harder to talk, too.
Right, yeah. And the bubbles, they're like younger bubbles, or more aggressive bubbles, because they're like the pet nat style bubbles, where it's like you're still getting the undissolved CO2. Like when you bottle an Emanation versus a Fluxion, when you're bottling Fluxion, it's dead still. So you're adding back the sweetness to get carbonation, whereas Emanation, it's dry, but there's still a lot of CO2 it's in solution that hasn't quite escaped. So I think you get that kind of like fizzle quality to it.
Yeah, very nice. Very nice. So while we're kind of drinking this, and can you tell me a little bit about the 5-year plan? What's going forward? You made it through the pandemic. You survived. You're still standing. You guys look great. Your hair's a little bit short from what I remember. I was looking for a ponytail.
2 weeks ago, I bobbed it.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, you look great. All right. I was like, wait is that Jon? Wait a minute.
Yeah, I'm going through some changes, but life is good. 5-year plan. It's a beautiful thing to think about. Eventually, I think we will have to build a warehouse, because it's just this facility is amazing, but there's no pallet-sized doors. We're moving a lot of cases around a lot of times.
The bottles are down here too, being stored, so that takes away from your production side.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean.
And forklifts.
No forklifts here. Yeah, there's a lot of work. And thanks be to our crew. The people that we've been working with. Like, they have to deal with a lot of stuff, as do we. But it's a blessing. It's been an amazing opportunity to expand into this space, and we use every nook and cranny.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah. And so eventually, I think within the 5-year plan is probably starting to work on a vision of a bigger facility and that works off of this place. That may not happen. Who knows? I mean, there's no way of telling. But I think the vision is just to keep doing what we're doing, and just continuing to learn and do it better and refine, and probably want to reach out more into the community once we're like less heads down, like get shit done kind of thing. try to like soften into it, and you know.
Do you guys ever get to leave the farm?
Here and there. Usually it's like a wedding or like a family gathering of sorts, you know.
Yeah.
But I do. I mean, we both prioritize like quality of life, so I think part of the 5-year plan is to sort of soften into like not doing so much and just enjoying what we have here, you know. And through that, like, I would hope that, you know, that whole concept of following your bliss and like everything else follows, you know.
Yeah, one could only hope.
Yeah, I think we should open Fluxion.
Okay.
Fluxion is like, you're looking at Fluxion Row right here. You're leaning on Fluxion Row. Yeah, this is kind of just happened. It's just happened to be that this became Fluxion Row, and it's a 1-year age cider blended with 2-year age cider. You know, and it's the Solera style, as I mentioned earlier, where, you know, there's cider from 2015 in this, but this particular vintage is a blend of 2019 and 2020, so it's our most current offering. And you're really kind of playing off more of like the acidity from the culturing and process. Get like a peppery quality.
I totally got the pepper, like right in the nose.
Yeah.
Like I knew I was drinking something different, not from the orchard up north. Like this is really different. It's delicious.
This is our forage.
Delicious.
This is our like kind of house forage blend, and the still point is this, but we celebrate the stillness and the soft buttery quality that you get from the without bubbles.
Yeah, the nose is really interesting because this is very different. So we had them all in the same glass. So I'm just trying to kind of enter it a little bit more.
The Emanation, I sort of feel like, is more like an English style crisp cider, even though it doesn't have that sweet to follow it. Like,
well, I don't know. English is like a
kind of all over the place.
All over the place.
Yeah,
and like, you know,
West
English
Country.
cider, you're going to get tannin.
Yeah, right.
You're going to get really pronounced
hard tannin. That's the thing.
You're doing Fable Farm cider.
You're right. But where I was going with that is that like Fluxion is maybe more like a Basque. Like it's got more like kind of like wild acidity, and I don't know. I mean,
I'm not getting that.
Yeah.
I'm not getting that.
No, okay.
No, I'm not getting that wild acidity.
It's just Fable.
And you know what I'm getting is like skins on the nose. That's what's kind of interesting to me. In a nice way, you know. I mean, it's. I want a cider that, you know, for different times. So there's ciders where I want to like drop into it and just kind of mull over and think about it. And this cider could go two ways. I could be drinking it at like the event today, and just enjoying it and saying, "Oh, this is great. Let me have some food," right? But I could also go sit in the corner for a while now and meditate on this.
Totally.
And try to like figure out what the heck's going on. And that's because of the approach you're doing. Yeah. Where you're taking, you know, Jon keeps on mentioning this, you know, the Solera approach where you're taking one barrel and adding it to another from different ages. And that's something you see in the wine world. We're seeing it more in the cider world now. And that's going to come. That's a complexity there. Yes, multiple time capsules.
Exactly, and the amazing thing about it is that no matter what apples we put in the Fluxion, every Fluxion is different foraged apples, but it usually tastes the same. It usually it's not the same, but there's a similarity.
Terroir.
Yeah,
that's your trick. You know, you're only going within a 10-mile radius.
Yep. And these barrels, you know, the barrels kind of like you spend a couple of years in there.
Definitely the barrels. Yeah. They are at home here, no doubt. Yeah, super interesting. It really a real like popping cider, which you wouldn't expect in a way because of like the aging process and the, you know, adding on from one year to the next. But it really pops. It's really bright. Yeah. A great, you know, year-round cider.
Yeah. You know, go to.
Don't just save it for the special meals. Okay? Get a case, and so you could like have it for the burger or whatever.
Absolutely,
you know?
absolutely.
Yeah, that's really tasty.
Yeah,
and they're all the same ABVs.
Generally, we range from like 6 to 7. Once you start getting into more of like the grape blends, it goes from like 8 to 9.
Yeah.
But emanation is sometimes even 5.5. But what is this?
I am noticing the difference. I haven't seen you since 2019, so we're talking like 4 years.
Quite a
right?
long time, yeah.
And what I've noticed is how your ciders have developed. Like, I am not getting any VA.
Yeah, I know.
And you don't need to make any, you're not making excuses, but you don't need to explain yourself.
Yeah.
Let people figure it out.
Totally.
Screw them.
Totally.
They think you're with vinegar and all that. There's plenty of makers out there in the world doing exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
You don't have it. I have tasted it on your cider in the past, but I'm not tasting it.
It shows up here and there, and then it's like
that happens.
But yet there's definitely barrels that were heavier on VA that are in that blend, but you
melded, like you said,
exactly.
you took a less VA mixture and did a really nice blend. And so your skill, you're getting it up. I mean, you definitely wow, what a difference a couple of years make. I'm noticing it in here. And maybe some of these barrels are from 4 years ago.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So well done on the blending.
Thank you.
Because that's a balanced cider.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to come by.
Yeah.
I imagine it's going to change a bit more as it warms up. As it warms up, just that one bottle.
Absolutely.
I'd
that's
be curious.
The beauty of it. Yeah. It just kind of changes as you experience it, as you sit there with it.
Right. And maybe as it warms up, maybe you might get a little bit more of the acid there, but I'm not sure.
Not so much. Yeah, this one's pretty balanced.
All right. So
this is La Crescent, Frontenac Blanc, and cider. Let me just double check.
Yeah, it's always good to kind of sip it first.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it's warm because it's just from the cellar. Could use like
that nose.
Yeah, just a few degrees cooler would be nice, but you really get. I like drinking stuff warm.
You're getting the grape right off there.
Yeah, you really get it raw. It's like citrusy,
That's great.
Yeah, very citrusy.
Yeah, it's really great.
Yeah. I know, I can't wait to bring this back.
Yeah.
We have like maybe 7 cases or 6 cases of that down there.
So the initial, right on the front of the tongue, right? So it's staying on the front of the tongue. That initial taste is like pingy, like a tangy, but not sweet. And then, you're getting the grape kind of coming over the roof of your mouth, kind of dropping in the back of the throat. The nose is just, again, you're getting both the apple and the grape.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate you coming out for this.
Yeah, I was like, how can I not have a recording with you guys?
Yeah, I know.
Cider Chat is listener supported, so if you enjoyed this episode and want to keep on hearing more Cider Chat, well, one thing you could do to help keep that going on and cider going up around the world is by becoming a patron today. You can find more info at the Cider Chat Patreon page. That's spelled Patreon, or hit the donate button at ciderchat.com. And while on the topic of patrons, I'd like to mention that coming up the first weekend of September is the Ross Cider Fest, and that's held by the Ross Cider and Perry Company based in Ross-on-Wye in the UK. I have attended this event. It's like a 3-day camp scene, but there's also day passes too. So if you have had the chance to go there, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't made it to the Ross Cider Fest yet, well, you definitely want to put it on your to-do list. There's the Yew Tree Pub up at the roadside that you could stop at and have a taste. Or in my case, I was camping out all weekend. I went up there and had a tea and then cider. Hey, you got to do it as the English do, right? And kind of pace yourself so you could go through the whole event. It's just a fantastic time. Ross alone has over 80 different single varietal ciders to taste, along with their blends, and Perry too. And then there's all these different makers and music happening. It is the place to be that first weekend of September, the Ross Cider Fest. Check it out at rosscider.com. And with that, I leave you here. This is Real Wind Caller signing off for now. Looking forward to seeing you in Ciderville.
Do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this. There is a reason why we drink it like this. There is a reason why we do it like this.
Yeehaw!